Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is time for another true crime video yet again, and today we will be talking about Catherine and Curtis Jones, the teenage siblings who were charged as adults for murdering their stepmother. Catherine Jones was born in 1985 to her parents Curtis Jones Sr. and Stacy Parks. The family lived in Florida and life was not easy, especially for Stacy, who had been experiencing physical abuse from her husband way before they were even married. A year later, in 1986, the pair welcomed yet again another baby, and this time it was a baby boy whom they named Curtis. But even though they now had a little family and had two lovely kids, the abuse did not stop. The situation had gotten so bad that at one point during Stacy's first pregnancy, when she was pregnant with Catherine, Curtis had actually beaten her up so badly that this caused for her uterus to tear, resulting to a premature birth. And as time passed by, Curtis's domestic violence against his wife just became worse and worse. By 1989, Stacy has had enough and decided to pack her belongings and leave. She went back to her parents in Kansas, but made the difficult decision to leave her children behind, as she was afraid that her mother wouldn't accept her kids simply because they were biracial. Now, I am not completely sure how long after, but once Stacy left, a male relative from Curtis's side of the family moved in, sharing a room with Curtis Jr. Now, this unidentified male relative was someone you do not want around your kids. Apparently, he had prior run-ins with the law and served 6 years for robbery. And aside from that, this man was also a registered sex offender and pedophile. Prior to moving in with the Jones family, he was facing charges involving his ex-girlfriend's 14-year-old daughter. And I'm not sure if Curtis Sr. was aware of those allegations of sexual assault involving a minor, but he let him stay with their family anyway. At some point, Curtis Sr. also starts dating a woman named Nicole Spites, who eventually moved in with the family as well. Nicole was a woman in her late 20s, and I have no idea how Catherine and Curtis Jr. felt about her, but they were able to maintain a good relationship with their mom, whom they would visit in Kansas from time to time. In one of their visits in 1994, Stacy noticed something off with her kids, and once she started talking to them, Curtis Jr. opened up regarding the sexual abuse that he had been experiencing with his new roommate. According to the teenage boy, their male relative would fondle and inappropriately touch him almost every single night. Mortified by what her son told her, Stacy wasted no time and reported this to the police right away. An investigation was opened, however, not long after this was closed, as Curtis Jr. for some reason took back his original statements and told everyone that it was all a lie. Now, fast forward to 2 years later, in 1996, another case was opened, this time for physical abuse. Curtis Jr. had multiple bruises on his body and also had an eye injury, causing for them to swell. But again, this case was closed and was never really explored further. Fast forward to another 2 years, in 1998, another investigation was yet again open, but for this time it was for Catherine. Apparently, she had run away from home, and one of her worried teachers filed a report regarding her concerns of Catherine being sexually abused. Sadly, this case was also closed after Curtis Sr. threatened his own daughter into saying that these allegations were not true. He simply did not believe that their male relative was capable of doing such heinous things, especially not to his kids. And it's really sad. I mean, these kids had no one to protect them. Their mother was in Kansas, and their father either had no idea about what was really going on at home, or he was simply in denial. Curtis Sr. refused to believe that his children are victims of abuse. His girlfriend did not care about what was happening, nor did she ever try to talk to them about it either. And worse, their abuser was there living with them, sharing the same room with one of his victims. But somehow these kids were still lucky because they had each other. Catherine told Curtis about the sexual abuse that she was experiencing from their relative, and at first, she was terrified that, just like their father, her brother wouldn't believe anything that she said. But he did. Curtis Jr. believed everything that his sister told him because the same man was doing the same things to him. And this shared experience just strengthened or fortified their bond. They had each other and no one else. In late 1998 or early 1999, Catherine, who was now 13 years old, was taking a shower when this male relative went into the bathroom and started masturbating as he watched her. That poor girl had no other choice but to slump down in a corner and waited for this relative to finish his business. And after he was done, he pulled his pants up and left 50 cents on top of the toilet for her. And this was the breaking point for Catherine. She wanted revenge and she wanted these adults gone for good. She told Curtis, her now 12-year-old brother, about these fantasies, and from then, the two siblings started to plot against the people who have done nothing but to let them down. On January 6, 1999, Catherine and Curtis were left alone with their stepmother, Nicole, their dad's girlfriend. Curtis Sr. and the male relative were out doing errands, and Nicole decided to keep herself busy by sitting in the dining room doing a puzzle. And the sibling knew that this was it. This was their chance. They took their dad's pistol and Catherine fired the first shot, hitting Nicole on the stomach. And due to the impact, Catherine fell to the ground, but Curtis Jr. was quick enough to take the gun and shoot Nicole multiple times. And then after this, it all started to sink in, and the kids started to panic, realizing what they had just done. They realized that they just killed someone. Freaked out, they dragged Nicole's body to a different part of the house before making an attempt to clean her blood with bleach. And knowing that they would get in trouble for this, the two staged a scene at home in hopes of making what happened look like a home invasion gone wrong. The two then left their house but stopped at a neighbor's to say that they accidentally fired the gun. Now, I'm not sure what the extent of this confession was, if they ever told the neighbor that they had also killed Nicole in the process, but as soon as they got out of the neighbor's house, the two kids started to run off and hide in the woods near their home. The morning after, January 7th, they were found and brought into custody. 13-year-old Catherine and her 12-year-old brother Curtis, both victims of abuse, were facing first-degree murder charges as adults. When this case first began to gain traction and public attention, not much was known, especially as to what their motives were and what made them do such a thing. All the public thought that these kids did not like their father's girlfriend and that's why they killed her. At some point, they were even seen as villains. They were perceived as evil children who acted out because they didn't want a stepmother, but we all know that that's not the case. And for some reason, they decided to keep their mouths shut for years. And their reasons for shooting Nicole weren't really explored as there was no trial. On August of 1999, the two siblings agreed to take a plea deal. They both pled guilty to second-degree murder and were sentenced to 18 years in prison plus a lifelong probation. And of course, these siblings were so close, so even though they were separately incarcerated, they still continued to talk and write to each other. However, this stopped when Curtis Jr. was moved to a different prison and was no longer permitted to communicate with his sister because they were co-defendants or partners in crime, literally. 10 years after their arrest, Catherine finally broke her silence and revealed the truth in an interview, telling everyone about the abuse that she and her brother experienced at home. After this, they were no longer seen as the siblings who conspired to murder their stepmom. And most of the people who knew about this case finally understood why Catherine and Curtis Jr. felt like they had no other choice but to do this. In the same interview, Catherine also mentioned that she felt more free and safe in prison than in their own home. And if this sounds familiar to you, Gypsy Rose Blanchard said the same thing after suffering years of abuse from her mother, Dee Dee. But anyway, back to the Jones siblings. This interview caught the attention of a man named Haramis Fleming, and he started writing letters to Catherine. The two became pen pals and eventually fell in love. In 2013, they got married while Catherine was still incarcerated. In 2015, after serving 16 years, Catherine and Curtis Jr. were both released from prison. They are still on lifelong probation but are doing pretty well. Now, sadly, Catherine's marriage ended up not working out, but she did receive a college scholarship and is now working to fight for kids or minors who are given unfair sentences just like they were. Curtis Jr. is now an ordained Christian minister, and I'm not sure about how their relationship is now, but Catherine did move to Kansas with their mother, Stacy. I am hoping that these two remain close, but as usual, I would love to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you think these siblings deserved to be charged as adults? Do you think they deserved this long sentence? Personally, I think it's unfair how they were charged as adults because they were very young. They were only 13 and 12 at the time that this happened. And it's just so unfair because the adult who actually did them harm, the male relative, got away with everything that he did to Catherine and Curtis. I also think that their dad should have been held accountable for letting something like this happen under his roof. I believe that Catherine and Curtis Jr. would have been given shorter sentences or possibly even be tried as juveniles if they spoke about the abuse that they experienced earlier. But we also have to understand that that is something, or that is a topic that's not really easy to talk about. They must have felt ashamed or even scared that, just like their father, no one else would believe them. Do you guys think they were tried as adults because of the severity of their crime? Because Nicole was shot at least 4 to 5 times. Or were these siblings simply racially profiled and were given heavier, longer sentences just because of the color of their skin? And, this was back in the 90s. I'm not saying that racism or racial profiling isn't prevalent these days, but it was worse during those times. And I think that, it's just my opinion, but I do think that the color of these kids' skin played a huge role or a huge factor as to why they were given such a heavy sentence. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and opinions on this case. And should there be any other case that you would like for me to cover on this channel, please let me know by leaving a comment. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys on my next video.